Yeah, ironically, after I finished jump master school, I ended up going on a Hollywood jump, which if you're not familiar with jumping, it's a static line jump. And when you go Hollywood, it means you don't have your combat gear, you don't have any of that stuff on you. So it should be the easiest jump, but ended up jumping. And right before I hit the ground, a gust of wind kind of collapsed part of my chute, and I basically sat down, which is not how you're supposed to land. And it compressed my L4, L5, S1, just, basically compression fracture on my back. And so constant pain even today, not a whole lot they can do until they end up fusing those piece of my spine together. But it's something I'm trying to hold off on because it'll cause a major loss of mobility. And so it definitely has an impact today. I mean, just being in constant pain is not fun for anybody. And then,
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential.
Hey everyone, welcome to the American Potential Podcast. I'm your host, David Fromm. So a few months ago, we went to Montana to record some episodes. Hopefully you've all enjoyed watching them or remember them. Matt, our engineer, it was your first time there, right? So
it was.
What did you think about Montana?
I loved it. Montana was spectacular. Now, they do call it Big Sky Country, right? And we managed to go there the 1 week that it was just completely cloudy for the entire time. So I don't know how big it was, but it was still cool. It was really cool. And being a guy from Colorado myself, I'm used to mountains, but there was something about those. They were just huge, massive, gorgeous mountains out there.
Yeah, it is really one of the most beautiful states in the country. It really is. I've been all over the West, which is phenomenal. As an East Coast guy, starting to explore the West was pretty eye-opening. But, Montana kind of is partially in a category by its own. It's just really got all of it, and it is pretty spectacular, and I was pretty darn glad that we got to go.
It was a treat to go. I was really happy. When Monica said, earlier on, hey, we're going to go to Montana, I was like, all right, that's one that's been on my bucket list. So if we go there again, I'm just saying, you won't have any arguments from me.
Yeah, we're just going to plan out sunny times, though. Anyway.
Yep.
While we were in Montana, we got to record our Veterans Day episode. And you might remember us talking about a group of veterans called the Veterans Navigation Network. And let me tell you, this isn't, just another nonprofit with a logo. This whole thing grew out of real boots on the ground experience. See, today we're sitting down with one of the founders, a fellow veteran who's walked the same tough roads as the folks he serves. He watched too many of his brothers and sisters in uniform come home only to feel like they were dropped into the wild with no map. Some were struggling to find a community. Others needed help with benefits or healthcare or housing or really you name it. Instead of sitting back and saying somebody ought to fix this, he did what veterans tend to do. He took action. That's how the Veterans Navigation Network was born. It's built on a simple idea that sounds like common sense, because it is. So today you're going to hear straight from the man who helped build it. I want to welcome to the podcast Blake Fuhriman, who is the founder and executive director of Veterans Navigation Network. Blake, welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, we're thrilled. We were thrilled to talk to your colleagues and kind of hear about just the great work you all are doing. So, just kind of going back to the beginning. I mean, you're a veteran, so obviously you decided to enlist in the Army. What made you decide to sign up and serve? And how'd you pick that branch?
I mean, 9/11 had happened when I was still pretty young, but it still made a pretty incredible impact on me, just thinking like I need to do something about this. And then I ended up having a mentor in my life that had been in special forces, and he brought up the idea of joining the military because I didn't want to go to college, and he said, you could go to special forces and do XYZ kind of tasks, so you could go to the Ranger Regiment and do the other option, and if I wanted to be part of that special operations community, and the Ranger Regiment and their mission, direct action, really taking it to the enemy, just stood out to me. And so that was the direction I went straight straight from basic to airborne school and then to RIP at the time. And now it's called RASP, the Ranger Assessment Selection Program. At the time, it was the Ranger Indoctrination Program. And it was a tough selection process, but was one of the greatest kind of ways to test my mettle, I guess. And got to meet a ton of just incredible people and wouldn't change it for anything.
Yeah, I'm always interested in folks who went in kind of an elite direction because, I mean, in anything in life, you kind of move in an elite direction. You really meet some pretty phenomenal people. But I would imagine in the armed services, it's actually even another level because people putting their lives on the line and pushing themselves so hard. I guess, like, what did you learn from the folks you met and the leaders you came into contact with, and how's that kind of impacted your life going forward?
So many things over the years. Still learning from some of them, even though outside the military now. And just got a call from my squad leader the other day, and still learning, still listening and learning from that guy. So I'd say one of the biggest takeaways that I had, though, was from my team leader, who ultimately was killed in Afghanistan, Jason Santora. He really showed me what servant leadership was. At this situation, even when you made it into regiment, you're still basically getting tested every day. I mean, whether you really want to be there, and team leaders are always pushing your buttons, trying to get you really prepared for combat. But you can only simulate combat in so many ways. So I think sometimes people would even call it hazing, but I don't think that's really what the intention was. It really was just a test your mettle, make sure you're ready to cover your brother's backs. And we were sitting around getting ready for this training event, and some of that was going on, and it was probably to that point of maybe hazing, but I don't really think it was that. But he stepped away from it and just went and started doing what we were really supposed to be doing, getting ready for that training event and building demolition charges and stuff like that, getting ready for a night event. And didn't say a word, didn't chew anybody out, didn't do anything. He just started working. And I'll just never forget seeing all these other team leaders like realize, oh, I should be doing what he's doing. And so it just slowly de-escalated the situation and changed the whole dynamic of the day to where we actually went and learned something instead of just, get smoked. And so, that's just, that principle is just one of the many stories and lessons I learned from him. Is you don't have to talk loudly to make a difference. You can really just be a servant and lead others.
Yeah. That's a pretty valuable lesson. So talk a little bit about what you did while you were in the Army.
Yeah, Ranger Regiment, really, for me, it was a lot of high-value targets, going after high-value targets in Afghanistan. So I did 3 deployments. I actually missed one because my dad had passed away, and so I went to his funeral. And then it was a slower one. Where they were at was pretty wintry, so they didn't do a ton of missions. So they had me stay back, and I ended up going to Jump Master School and SEER School, which ended up setting me up for my life after the military. But yeah, it was just a lot of mission. I mean, very high op tempo. So, I mean, if you weren't deployed overseas, you were training to deploy overseas. I mean, it was kind of nonstop go all the time. So
now you eventually were injured, and that was probably a pretty life-altering thing for you. Maybe can you tell me about what happened and how that kind of changed the trajectory of your life?
Yeah. Ironically, after I finished Jump Master School, I ended up going on a Hollywood jump, which, if you're not familiar with jumping, it's a static line jump. And when you go Hollywood, it means you don't have your combat gear, you don't have any of that stuff on you. So it should be the easiest jump, but ended up jumping. And right before I hit the ground, a gust of wind kind of collapsed part of my chute, and I basically sat down, which is not how you're supposed to land. And it compressed my L4, L5, S1, just, basically compression fracture on my back. And so constant pain, even today, not a whole lot they can do until they end up fusing those, piece of my spine together. But it's something trying to hold off on because it'll cause a major loss of mobility. And so, it definitely has an impact today. I mean, just being in constant pain is not fun for anybody. And then, we were talking about kids a little earlier, but I got a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, and keeping up with them is tough enough, but let alone when you got back pain. So,
yeah. So were you like medically discharged? Is that what happened?
No. I ended up toughing it out. So I went a month before. Went to sick call for that. It got so bad that I couldn't even tie my shoes. My ex-wife was helping me tie my shoes, and it was pretty bad. So finally I went sick call, and that's when I found out it was fractured. They put me on what you call like a dead man's profile, where I couldn't do anything for about 4 months. And so, I mean, I wasn't doing a ton other than going to training events, kind of watching my team. At the time, I was a team leader, and then another deployment came up. That profile went away, and off I went on one more deployment. And then that's when I realized, like, this isn't sustainable. Like, I'm in too much pain. We kind of were at the point of drawing down in Afghanistan. This was in 2013. And so it just said the mission had kind of changed. It wasn't very, it was almost like police action at the time. And so it just wasn't something I necessarily want to do. So between being in pain all the time, I actually came home from that deployment and to an empty house. I mentioned ex-wife. That's why, because when I got home from that deployment, it's like 1:00 in the morning. I call, no answer, and I just figure, okay, she's sleeping, doesn't know, and take a cab out to my house, which was about an hour off post, and house is empty, dog abandoned, and just not a great way to come home from Afghanistan. And
Blake,
just that awful. Combination of all that stuff led me to deciding it was time to get out. In hindsight, what I should have done is probably re-enlisted and then worked on a med board. But I wasn't thinking about that. I was just thinking about the pain I was in, both physically and then emotionally with her. And so, the loss of my team leader, we lost 23 other, Rangers and attachments over the course of those 4 years that I was in. And, it was just, I don't know, time for me to get out. So ended up getting out, and then I don't know what it is, ironically, terribly, I don't know, but, that fractured back that I had in the service with the MRI, dead man's profile, all that stuff, that ended up getting denied by the VA, saying it was not service connected. And
how's that possible? I mean, honestly, we've done a lot of shows on the VA and some things that are just unbelievable that they tell veterans, but that to me, I can't even believe that. Like, how in the world is that the case?
Yeah. I think for me, it was, our unit at the time, I think regiment's gotten a lot better, but I mean, it was kind of, you're getting out, we're done with you kind of thing. And you kind of gave up or quit on us. So there wasn't a ton of support then, but now I think it's much better. They have a Ranger for Life program. They're really doing a lot better of supporting their Rangers when they get out. And I think that's trickling down to the rest of the Army too. But, I never went to a sick call except for that issue. So that's probably the one thing that should have been really easy for me to service connect. And, but for whatever reason, they denied the first one. I appealed it. They denied it. And so then I waited, 3 years, and it was other veterans who kind of told me, like, you need to get a veteran service officer who will actually advocate for you and help you through this process, so you're not just doing it on your own. And so I did that. I ended up going to a doctor on my own dime to, say, yes, this fractured spine is because of his military service. And so it was a challenge. I mean, 3 years of kind of trying on again, off again, because I was so frustrated.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, man, I'm so sorry you went through that, that any veteran goes through that. It just is non-commonsensical. And so you're getting back to civilian life. And I imagine, obviously with the medical issues, getting divorced, all kinds of things, transition back to civilian life was probably less than ideal. So what was it like trying to make that transition?
Yeah, for me, I just didn't know necessarily what I wanted to do. I thought I did. I started a shooting school right out the gate and put all my savings into it. Actually, set up my first class and had 30 people sign up, but I didn't really know anything about business. And, coming from the regiment where like if somebody said they're going to do something, they did it, to the civilian world, where that's not always the case. I had 30 people sign up. I didn't make anybody prepay, and one person showed up for the class. And so it basically kind of bankrupted me right out the gate, because I had put all my savings into that. And that one person got one heck of a shooting course that day. But it was so frustrating. So I ended up on an oil field spraying weeds. So they like killed the weeds so that the oil field or the oil wells don't catch them on fire and burn down the whole oil field, Yeah. And so I was in North Dakota, Montana, spraying those and just wondering, not to demean that profession, like it's something that needs done so we can drive our cars and all that stuff. But I just was wondering, how did I go from the Ranger Regiment with so much purpose in my life to spraying weeds on an oil field where I didn't find that purpose? And
right.
I mean, I was taking care of my family, but that wasn't enough, the purpose for me. So I just, it was a struggle. That transition out was a struggle. I mean, I had a big drinking problem at the time. I, was not dealing with, so 3 years for me to get the fractured back connected. It was 7 years before I even thought about going to a counselor about, seeing, my team leader being killed, all those guys get killed, not to mention the other stuff that we were doing that, I mean, I think we were in the right for doing, but it was, it still makes an impact when you shoot somebody or something like that. So, 7 years before I went to a counselor, and then, another probably 3 years before I ended up actually getting that service connected as far as PTSD and all that stuff. So, it's a journey. I mean, I think, I mentioned earlier joining the SEER community and doing that training. And one of the things that we got to do was, interview some prisoners of war from like Vietnam era. And so you'd have these guys that, had been in those, I mean, terrible situations, the Hanoi Hilton, things like that, just like the most terrible living conditions, getting treated terribly. And they come back and go back to work and, for the most part, be pretty fine until they retired. And once they retired, you start having PTSD symptomology pop up. And I think it's really, you have that time to think about those things, about those experiences, and you'd have nightmares popping up for those guys, even though it happened, years and years and years, 30 years before they were interviewed. And so all that to say is I think the transition out of the military, it's a lifelong endeavor. It's not like you get out, suddenly you're all gung-ho in the civilian sector.
Do you think that it was that they were busy and kind of were pushing it aside, and the same with current, folks like yourself, or do you think it was like more about having purpose, and that when you retired, maybe that professional purpose wasn't there or something else, and that allowed the PTSD to kind of move in and occupy more space? Or what do you think kind of was the causation there?
I think it's a combination of those two things. Exactly. I'd say that's probably one of the biggest struggles we see with the Veterans Navigation Network is veterans not finding that purpose outside the military. So purpose and camaraderie, those are the two things. Like when you get out of the military, suddenly you just went from fighting for the freedom of, Americans across the globe to now what? And then those people that you had just, spent a year with in a tent together, or, I mean, you definitely spend way more time with them than you do your own family during the time you're in the service.
Yeah.
And you go from that to, I mean, they're truly your family at that point, to you can't even get on the base, without getting a new ID or something like that. I mean, it's just, or getting an escort, depending on the base. And so you're almost like kicked out of your home and your family. I mean, you can still call and text, but they're getting ready for the next deployment or whatever. I mean, they're, getting ready for battle or whatever. So it's not like you can have that same kind of relationship once you get out. So those are the two biggest things that we see people struggle with. And I think not having those definitely leads to those episodes of PTSD, not just being there. I think like even when I got out and was busy, like doing the oil fields, I was working a ton, 80 plus hours, 120 hour weeks.
Wow.
But they, I still had, maybe some of the anxiety. Thankfully, I was out in the middle of a field all by myself, so not as much. But if I went to like Costco or Walmart or something like that, man, somebody's walking in front of me going slow, I mean, it was all I could do not to just start screaming at them because it made me so mad. Like, don't you have a purpose in your life? Like, why are you checking your phone in the middle of the aisle? Like, there's other people here trying to do things. It would enrage me well beyond reason. And so, I mean, now I've got some tools to help deal with that and cope and, move on it. But at the time I didn't. So,
well, I want to get into what the Veterans Navigation Network does for veterans. But before we do that, I mean, how did veterans help you get what you needed?
Yeah. So it was, I got back, and within 6 months of being in Afghanistan, I was out and probably got my first VA appointment. And I mean, we work really closely with the VA, so I don't mean to degrade or anything the VA. But this just my personal experiences. I went into my appointment, never met this person. I've got, KIA bracelets. I don't know if you can see those in the video, but, memorializing my team leader, another team leader that were killed. And I think, the VA being the ones that treat veterans all day, every day, should probably have a little cultural competency to recognize what those are. And then, I met my first appointment, never met this person. I mean, one of the first questions is a suicide screener. Like, are you thinking about killing yourself today? And at the time I was just like, well, even if I was, I'm probably not going to tell you, and I didn't say that, but that's what came across my mind. And at the time, I was not doing very well. So I would say I was probably at that level. And, so yeah, it ended up being other veterans who said, hey man, like, you're not doing all right. Like, you need to deal with some of this stuff. You should go talk to this counselor. Here's who I use, and, you're having so many issues with getting your VA stuff, your disability or, things like that. Like, here's the VSO that helped me, and it was those personal connections or sometimes even introductions to the person that could help me. And I just thought, like, this should be the program. Like, this should be what's out there, not just the VA, because the VA can't be everything to everybody. But having those veterans kind of serve as a mentor was very helpful to me. And so I ended up doing some temporary security at a place, and they allow people to come walk in the mornings in the mall. And, I was doing this temporary security while I waited to do some other contract work that was much more where I wanted to be. And I commented on this guy's hat. He had a medevac hat. And I just made a comment like, oh, thanks for serving. And it turns out it wasn't actually a military medevac hat, but he had served during Vietnam era. And we became good friends after that and ended up talking about this transition out of the military. And so 50 years before, he'd been transitioned out of the military, Vietnam era. And we were talking about some of the challenges I had. And he was like, I had those same challenges 50 years ago. And we just kind of thought, boy, we got to do something about this. So he became a founding board member, and we started VNN, and it really is all based off of that veteran, helping the veteran. So veteran to veteran
that's
care.
Awesome. And now you're doing the same on a much larger degree. So what services does the Veterans Navigation Network provide?
So we definitely try not to duplicate services that are already out there. And so we really try to do that connection, and we call it resource navigation. That's probably our bread and butter as far as the main thing that we do is just connecting veterans to a person out there that can actually help them, and not just, here's a business card, but let me introduce you to the person that can actually help you with what's going on right now, whether that's healthcare enrollment, starting your own business, maybe you fell on hard times because life happens and you need a little bit of financial assistance, like whatever that looks like. And some of it's like, man, this person's at the worst point in their life ever, and they just need that helping hand up. Or it's the place where somebody's like trying to grow their already established business and they're doing really well. And so, I mean, it's everything in that spectrum. And so that's probably our primary focus, but we also have a peer mentor program. So it's other vets who've gotten out, found success, and then want to share that with their fellow vets. And so they kind of get assigned to help set goals with them and really just, set goals and then identify the barriers to achieving those goals, and then, problem solve. How are we going to eliminate some of those barriers? And that's been one of our more effective, I mean, because you're not just handing somebody a resource, you're handing them the resources, tools they need, but then somebody to walk alongside with them and kind of keep them accountable as they achieve those things. So it's been really impactful for those who participated.
Sure. Well, it seems like a common thread here is that it's very personal and individualized. It seems like it's very relational. And I kind of could see how that would be such an impactful and important part of this offering. You know, that people can give services, but I mean, you got the VA, you got lots of other large organizations, but what you guys are doing is having real veterans come alongside and mentor, give specific advice, and understand what their needs are, and really giving them that personalized service. I imagine your outcomes are far better than most people's.
Yeah, it's not just somebody saying go to the VA. It's somebody who's used the VA, realize what it's good at, maybe what it's not good at, and can help them kind of, not just, go to the place, but here's how you message your provider. Here's how you fill your prescription. Like, here's how you do all this stuff, and teach them how to do it, not just because they're doing it also, it's definitely that peer aspect. And our mentors and most of our staff are not. We've actually got a couple, including Lorraine, who had previously been on your guys' show, that are certified behavioral health peer support specialists, but the majority of our staff are not, and none of our volunteer peer mentors are either. And so it's just really, that's that peer aspect. You don't have to be certified to relate to somebody with your experiences.
One thing we talked about earlier was the need for people to have purpose and camaraderie, returning veterans to have purpose and camaraderie, because it's such a change from, it was such a rich environment for that when you're in the military, and then there's a hole there. Do you find that the folks who are doing the mentoring and the folks who are working to help other veterans, that this provides some of that fulfillment?
For sure. One of the other things that we do is a lot of advocacy for veterans. And I mean, Montana's 10% of our population is made up of veterans.
Really?
And when you look at people who live in their households, and now you're talking, 25 to 30% of the state are in a veteran household. And so veterans should have a voice here in Montana. And yet we're number one for veteran suicide. We don't have a ton of, support for veterans here in Montana. And there's a lot of nonprofits doing really good things, but as far as the state kind of stepping up, I mean, we're one of only 4 states in the country that tax military retirement pay. It's crazy.
Wow.
Yet we're a really red state, which is kind of, I'm conservative, and
I know an organization that maybe should take a look at tackling that.
Yeah, well, it's kind of baffling to me that we still do that, and I think we're missing out as a state. You've got people who are retired generals, retired sergeant majors that have started multi-million-dollar companies, and yet they're choosing to go live in these other states like Florida, Wyoming, these places that aren't taxing. They still have very similar values to Montana, but they're not taxing on retirement, so they're choosing to go to those places instead. So I think we're, missing out on a few $1,000s in military retirement, or we're gaining that, but we're missing out on these $1 million companies coming to Montana. So, but as far as your actual question, finding that purpose, I mean, the advocacy piece of, giving veterans a voice is definitely gives a lot of purpose, but also fighting for them when their voice isn't heard. So, I mean, our surviving spouses that we're working with, who's, veteran possibly has succumbed to PTSD and suicide. And we're talking young widows with small kids, and it's heartbreaking. So it is very relational, as you said earlier, the work that we do. But because of that, I think it makes us really strong advocates, and you've got that person sitting across from you. You're going to do everything you can to fight for them. And so there is a lot of purpose in that.
Yeah. Are there any stories of veterans that you guys have worked with that come to mind that you really are proud of the work that you all have done, or have been really gratified by the results that you've seen in their lives?
Yeah, I think Mike, our program manager, he's worked with the surviving spouse who, unfortunately we were too late to catch the veteran. Veteran didn't hear about us. We weren't able to connect with them, but, picking up the pieces, they wrote a letter after, he helped them get survivors benefits and actually provided with some resources to help their young daughter, kind of cope with what was going on. And, we got a letter from her just basically saying how they just don't know where they would be if Mike hadn't been a part of their life and to their life and helped them not just survive financially, but actually survive, emotionally after that death. That's one end of the spectrum. We'd obviously much rather catch before we get to that point. And so, one veteran I'd worked with was, served in the 80s, early 80s, late 70s, and had actually protected our nuclear sites. Security on those nuclear sites, had been told over and over again that he had actually not served long enough to be eligible for VA benefits and had kind of come on some hard times financially, but was still just over that threshold for Medicaid enrollment. And so was kind of caught with not having insurance, and he ended up with a hernia.
Gosh.
And the hernia ended up being so big, it was the size of a volleyball hanging out of his stomach. Big guy, but still, just crazy how huge that hernia was. And nobody would operate on him because he didn't have insurance. They said it wasn't life-threatening. Meanwhile, the guy can't even drive down the road without this thing rubbing on his steering wheel and just causing all kinds of pain. And we ended up talking to the VA and be like, are you sure this guy's not eligible? Like, from what we're seeing, he was. And there had been a law change during the time that he had served, where it went from 90 days of consecutive service to 2 years. And since he had served in the 90 days, he actually only needed 90 days, and he had that. He had served just shy of 2 years, and so he'd been denied, all those times for healthcare. And so, 40 years later, we got him enrolled in the VA. He got his surgery for his hernia, not to mention some other issues that were actually service connected, taken care of. And so even the disability claim, hadn't been filed for 40 years. And so, that was pretty impactful for sure for his, just life changing for him.
Well, hey, as we wrap up, how beneficial do you think it would have been to you as a veteran coming out who struggled, if you had the Veterans Navigation Network as a resource for you?
I think life happens like it happens for a reason. A lot of times, we definitely have that free will and can make those changes. But I love where I'm at in life. But I can't imagine where I would be if something like the internet existed. I would have been taken care of right away. I think it's incredibly valuable. Otherwise, I wouldn't do it. If I didn't feel that we were serving a purpose, my long-term goal is for VNN not even to need to exist. I want to run us out of business because I want to do the advocacy work so that veterans are taken care of the way we promised to take care of them. And VNN goes up. That's my long-term goal. Probably not what you've heard many CEOs or executive directors say, but that's my goal.
That's a great goal. Well, Blake, I really appreciate you sharing, your life story and then your life's work with us. I really admire not only your service and the sacrifice you made, but what you're doing going forward here. You're just making a difference in a lot of people's lives, people that our nation really owes a debt to and needs to care about. And so I really appreciate the work that you're doing with VNN and really helping out your fellow veterans and making the world a better place.
Appreciate that. Definitely appreciate you giving us a voice.
Yeah. No, I love that you came on. I appreciate it a lot. So thanks so much. Hey, folks, if you like this episode and would like to stay connected with the podcast, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, as well as following us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Always remember, liberty and freedom are easily taken for granted. Don't take it for granted. Go out there and defend freedom and liberty. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.